Well, today we're kicking off this series, B.L.E.S.S. And here's what I would say about this series. This series, I think, is inevitable. And what I mean by it being inevitable is, well, 30 years ago, 27 years ago, I moved to Coweta County. And when we moved to Coweta County to start this church, we knew that Coweta County did not need another church for people who wanted to go to church. By that I mean there were 60,000 people in Coweta County at that time, and there were plenty of churches for people who were looking to go to church. So we wanted to be a church for people who weren't looking to go to church. We wanted to be a church for the rest of us, for people who didn't think church was relevant to them, who weren't following Jesus, who had been following Jesus and stopped at some point. We wanted to be a church for them. And so that's how we started as a church. And over the years, we've continued to be that place. It's one of the things I'm most proud of, that we're a place where anybody, literally anybody, can come. And we hope that you feel like you belong here. In addition to that, along the way, we wanted to be the kind of church that even if you weren't a person who didn't know Jesus, we wanted to be a place where everybody could come and people who didn't know Jesus, so we could say to them, hey, you and Jesus meet each other, and then the two of you will all work out your stuff. Our job is just to love people. It's God's job to change people. I don't have to be in charge of changing you. You love me, I love you, and then God will change us both. But in addition to that, we wanted to be a place for people who we might never get to come to church, who might never even follow Jesus, but because they live near us, we wanted to be a place where we just made our community better, that our community, Coweta County, was better because we are part of this community. Our idea was that along the way, we wanted to be a place where people who don't believe what we believe would say, hey, you know, I don't know what I think about what they believe and even all the ways they go about it at that No Perfect People place, but I sure am glad they're a part of our community because they make our community a better place to live. And I'll tell you, if you've been a part of community for a while, those two things are the things that I am most proud about with our church. And not proud for me because I could not have made this happen. It's God using people like me and you together that have made those two kind of things possible. A place where anybody can come and we can say to them, hey, meet Jesus. We're Jesus followers and you can follow Jesus and you and Jesus can work out your stuff. We're just trying to love you as he loves us. And then where we can make a difference in our community. So through the years, we've tried to sponsor things. We've started things. We've been the first donors in on some pretty big things in our county now to try to make a difference in our community, to try to start things where we could bless our community and just be a blessing to everybody, even if you didn't come to our church. And, you know, even just recently, we sent a group of people off to California. They just have gotten back, and hopefully this fall we'll be telling you more about the foster camp that the camp we hope to launch for foster kids in our community so we can provide respite for some foster families and just treat those kids like they're the best kids in the world, that they know somebody loves them that much. And they went off to get training about that, and we hope to tell you more about that. But in addition to that, starting in this last year or so, we started saying to other organizations in our county, hey, we don't have to start this, and we don't even have to be giving money if you don't need money. One of the things that we have that a lot of you don't have is we have people that want to help. So, hey, if you're Abby's Angels and you need some people to help at your race, hey, call us at Community Christian. We have volunteers that would love to help. If you have a rainbow run you want to do and we want to help with that, if you have an Alzheimer's event, you're trying to raise money for Alzheimer's, we have volunteers that would love to help with that. You're EC parents and you have to serve in the concession stand during football games and you don't get to see your kids on the field because you're serving the concession stands. Hey, we have people that don't have any kids on the field and we'd love and just come and serve you in that way so you can go and be with your kids. And again, it's one of those things I'm proud about, that those organizations have seen how you serve and how you make a difference, and we're having more of those opportunities. So this, what we're going to talk about, a bless, is inevitable because it's at the heart of who we are as a church. But I need to tell you, that's not really what this series is about. It's not about who we are collectively. This is about me and you individually. It's about our purpose, what God has called us to do as individuals. See, when it comes to purpose, I want you to think in terms of what do you have to do tomorrow that really matters? In fact, if I ask you, hey, what are you doing tomorrow? For most of us, you'd have something on your mind. You'd think about places you had to go, maybe you have a doctor's appointment, or you have some work that you didn't get done, and you have to catch up on it, and there's a bunch of to-do kind of things that you have to do. But among most of us on our list, there's a lot of things that, honestly, they just get categorized under it's really just the same old stuff. A lot of the have-tos that I have to do, it's just the same old stuff, and after a while, it just doesn't feel like it has much purpose. In fact, I heard this a number of years ago. You may have heard it too. It was written by a guy a while back. He talked about his life this way. He says, you get up and you put at the same old time and shut off the same old alarm clock, walk in the same old bathroom, look at the same old face, the same old mirror, get in the same old shower, drive out with the same old towel, go down to the same, put on the same old clothes, walk down to the same old kitchen, get out the same old bowl, eat the same old cereal, kiss the same old wife goodbye. Then you get in the same old car, drive down the same old road, the same old job, walk in, sit at the same old desk, laugh at the same old jokes told by the same old people in the same old way at the same old time, punch out at the same old time, get back in the same old car, drive back down the same old road, drive to the same old garage, walk in and hug the same old kid, sit down at the same old table, eat the same old dinner, fall asleep in the same old recliner at the same old time, get up, drag yourself to bed, roll over, kiss the same old wife, ask the same old question, get the same old answer, roll over and go to sleep the same old way, set the alarm clock to get up and do the same old thing another day. That kind of life sort of, honestly, though you might not have said it that way, it sort of feels like that for us. But for followers of Christ, our life is not just what we have to do that just becomes this same old kind of thing. It's what God's called us to do that adds purpose to the things we're doing in our life. Which brings us to what has God called us to do. What is it that God has asked us to do? And that's another reason why I call this series that it was just inevitable that we eventually talk about this. As a group collectively now, we know who we are. We're a place where anybody can come and you can believe at Community Christian. I mean, you can belong at Community Christian long before you believe, and if you hang out long enough, you may not believe what God will help you become. We believe that if you come together in long enough and you and God begin to work out your stuff, you'll be shocked of what actually could happen in your life. And so as a group, collectively, we've known for a long time that our job is to create that kind of place and then to go into our community and be a blessing in our community. But that's not what we're talking about. We're talking about what's your purpose? What does that look like for you Monday through Friday? What does it look like for you the days that you're not sitting in church and helping us create that kind of environment? What about at your job? What about at your school? What about at your work? What about where your kids go and they play ball? What is your purpose? What has God called you to do in that place? Well, I want to show you something. Just because none of us can get enough of Jason Collins, I want to show you a 1-minute clip from last week's message that is not new, but it is really, really clear. It's what we need to hear about our purpose. So let's play this clip.
He said this. He said, the only thing that counts, the only thing that counts is faith expressing itself through love. For the entire law is fulfilled. In other words, everything that you find in the rules and regulations can be wrapped up in this, keeping this one command. Love your neighbor as yourself. Now, doesn't that sound familiar? I wonder where Paul got that. See, here's something that we just often forget about all of the laws and the rules that you find in the New Testament that apply to Christians under Jesus. Every single one of them is just explanation of the one command Jesus gave. They're just commentary. They're an attempt by Christians to figure out how do we apply the one command of Jesus to love one another. Because when you seek to follow that one command, you don't need any rules anymore. You don't need a bunch of religious activity. You don't need any other measurement in your life to find out if you're growing or if you're maturing to be a spiritual adult.
Now, the truth is, as much as we all love that message, that wasn't new. All of us have heard that before. Love your neighbor as yourself. And almost all of us, in fact, I bet all of us agree that that's what we ought to be about. In theory. It's when it comes down to actually me loving my neighbor, like loving the person who I don't get along with in my HOA. It's in actually loving the person that I work with. It's loving the person in my school that is hard for me to love. It's our goal in this series to get at this idea. Is anybody actually at your work, at your school, is anybody actually in your neighborhood, are they actually blessed because you live there, because you follow Jesus? Is there anyone, or the people that are around you, would they say that you actually have blessed their life? What it would happen, the heart of this series is, what would actually happen and if you and I actually got better at doing the one thing Jesus asked us to do? What if we got away from just agreeing that we ought to love our neighbor, and you and I actually got about loving our neighbor? And not like our neighbor, big theory kind of neighbor, I mean our neighbor. What if you and I actually got better at this one thing? And to move this beyond just an idea that we have to actually getting to some concrete steps that everyone joining in, from if you're in the 6th grade or you're 70 years old, everyone can do the concrete steps that we're going to talk about in this. We're offering to you this idea of bless. And it represents 5 practices that they show up in the life of Jesus as he was blessing the world, and they're 5 practices that all of us can do. Now, I need to say to you up front, you can see this is an acrostic, and this is just honesty. No one on our staff came up with this acrostic. I don't think that way. Most of the people on our staff don't think this way. But I will tell you, I have been using this now for almost a year in my life, and it really does help remember these 5 practices, and they really do make a difference. And this idea of bless, since the very beginning of God's interaction with human beings and God beginning to make covenants with human beings and say, you will be my people, God's idea has been the same thing. He said to the first people, and I will bless you, and you will be a blessing. I will bless you so you can be a blessing to the whole world. The whole world will be blessed through you. I'll bless you, and you go out and bless. But how do we actually go about blessing the people at our school, in our neighborhoods, where I work, the people that I play on the ball team with? How do I go about it? Well, to answer that question concretely, we offer you these 5 practices. Now, before I give you the first one, let me say that for some of you here who like lists and you like to-do lists, and your idea will be you're going to write these down and then you're going to go through them and check them off one by one and say, do it, I've done it, I'm good. That's not really what this is about, and just doing it in that fashion, it really won't be a blessing to anybody. But I also need to say to some of you who think this is going to be way too simple and you're waiting for something that makes you feel in a certain way and you think, well, it couldn't be that easy, I need to have something way more complicated than this. Let's just admit that until you come up with the other thing you're going to do, that you won't opt out of this just because you think it's too simple. Let's don't fall into either trap on this. So to get us started this week in this short series, here's the first practice. And it's the B in bless, and it's begin with prayer. Now, see, that first one represents why I could never come up with this, because as you can see, it should be a P there, but bless doesn't work as well as bless, and so they made it begin with prayer. And even though I would not have said it that way, I do know for sure that beginning with prayer is the right place to start on this idea of blessing the people in our world. And to get you to see that a little bit, I want to tell you a story about a guy. Now, this guy doesn't go to our church. In fact, he doesn't live in our state. This guy works for campus ministry at Michigan State University. And over the last few years, he's been making it his practice every day to wake up, and one of the first prayers he prays is, God, lead me to the people today that you want me to bless with my life. And then he just goes out in his day, and he assumes that the God who said, if you ask me in faith, I'll answer that prayer, that everyone he meets is somebody God wanted him to bless. He prays this prayer, God, lead me to the people you want to bless with my life, and then he just assumes every single person that he meets is the person that God wanted him to bless. Well, he tells about a particular day when he was supposed to meet a person for a meeting they had scheduled, and then at just the last minute, the person canceled the meeting, and instead of doing what he would normally do, which is, answer some email or check out Facebook or, do something on his phone, listen to a podcast, instead of, in that moment, he decided that he would just pray. And what he prayed was, God, what do you want to do with these minutes that I now have available? And while he was sitting there praying this prayer, a name came to his mind, and the name was Janice. Now, he knew immediately who Janice was. He knew her from some other kind of encounters, and the idea, as he thought about Janice, the next thought that came to his mind is, you need to tell her how to follow Jesus. Now, you should know that Janice wasn't a part of the ministry he was a part of. In fact, Janice, he had just sort of met, and she wasn't a follower of Jesus. She had not been going to church. In fact, he knew her well enough, but not really that well. But because he had prayed the prayer, he decided to move in faith and assumed it was what God wanted him to do. So he called her and said, hey, you got time for a cup of coffee? And she said, sure. And so when they met for a cup of coffee, after they got their coffee and sat down, he said to her, hey, this may seem weird, but I had a few minutes and I was praying that God would use the minutes, and your name came to my mind, and the idea came to me that I was supposed to tell you how to follow Jesus. At which point, she began to cry. Now, ladies, if you don't know this, if you're ever with a man and you start to cry, all men have the same reaction, oh no, what did I do wrong? And really, in our head, it's like, danger, 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 I don't know what to do. And so he said, oh no, I'm sorry, I didn't mean to be so insensitive, and I know that was sort of abrupt. I'm sorry for being so direct on that. And she said, no, it's not that. I just can't believe you're here saying that. She said, last night, I wound up going to a Bible study, and the whole time I was at the Bible study, people were talking about following Jesus, and as I went home later, I realized I didn't know how to follow Jesus. I didn't even really know what it meant to follow Jesus. And so I couldn't sleep last night, and I was thinking about, I need to know how to follow Jesus, and so I just prayed, God, would you bring somebody to me to tell me how to follow Jesus? And then here you are. Isn't that amazing? Wouldn't you love to live that kind of life? Well, Dave says since he's been praying that kind of prayer, he doesn't have those kind of meetings all the time, but he says every day has not been the same old, do the same old thing in the same old way. That every day has become this adventure of interactivity with him and God, blessing people in his world. Now, I want you to note that he prayed the prayer, and then he assumed that God was answering it. See, prayer is not only the way that we start this whole thing of blessing the world, it's how I find out what my personal mission is in life, and it does really show up in Jesus' life. Let me just read this to you. This is out of the book written by a man named Luke, who's telling about the life of Jesus. Here's what he says. Then Jesus, being filled with the Holy Spirit, this is right after Jesus has been baptized by John the Baptist in the Jordan River, he returned from the Jordan and was led by the Spirit into the wilderness. So the rest of that is Jesus goes off into the wilderness and he begins to pray. And he prays for a long time, and he encounters temptation. The evil one tempts him there, and he prays the whole time through it. And then 2 chapters after that's over, here's what it says. Jesus is now deciding who's going to join him in this personal mission that he's going on. God's led him from the desert, and he's now set off on this mission that eventually changes the world. And he's praying, he's wanting to begin the mission. Here's what it says. One of those days, Jesus went out to the mountainside to pray, and he spent the night praying to God. When morning came, he called his disciples to him, and he chose 12 of them, who he designated apostles. Now, a whole group of people following Jesus, and Jesus knows it's time to start the mission, and he chooses 12 that he separates from the rest. They're going to be the apostles, and of course we know they wound up changing the world. What's sad is as I read that, and this will tell you a lot about me, if I had been in that position and I knew it was time to launch some big thing and I knew I had to choose leaders, I would have skipped right over the prayer thing. Honestly, I would. I would have just gone out and I would have chosen the best leaders that I could have chosen. But these choices, they were so important. I mean, they changed the world. And as I read to you earlier, it's always been God's plan to bless the world, that God would bless us and then we would bless the world. But when that started with Abraham and then the nation of Israel, and he said to them, I'll make you a nation and I'll bless you and you'll bless the world, somehow it got all messed up for them, and they thought, God has blessed us and he's made us special, and if anybody wants to be blessed, they have to come to us. They have to come to us, not us go to them. But God would not be thwarted. So Jesus is sent, and he chooses 12, and they get the mission, and they go out to bless the world. And you and I now are followers of Jesus because they were blessed, and they blessed us by coming to us. It's always been God's mission to go out. And when you think about Jesus praying for these 12 that would eventually change the world, eventually leading to me and you, they weren't intuitive kind of choices. I mean, you think about some of the people that he chose, they weren't the obvious choices. They weren't necessarily the smartest ones. Some of them weren't even very good people. But he picked the exact right people for the mission that it would take, and he prayed to start the whole thing, that they would bless the world. He prayed, and everything changed. Some of you have been around long enough to hear me talk about my story, and I don't have time to tell you all the details of my story, but prayer was such a vital part of my story. In fact, I didn't even know how much prayer was a part of my story until years later, and then looking back on it, I can see how much prayer had been involved in the whole thing. Long story short, my story is about, when I was younger, I did what I wanted to do, how I wanted to do it, when I wanted to do it, where I wanted to do it, and I didn't care who got hurt. And of course, the people that got hurt most were the people that were unlucky enough to be closest to me. And then eventually I realized the person most getting hurt was me. I was hurting me the most. Well, through a whole series of events that really they aren't all that important, I wound up leaving where I had grown up in Mississippi and going to live somewhere else and with some family. And I was able to stay with them for a month, but only, they said, if I would agree to go to church with them. And so I did. Little did I know that whole time that I was there, they and other people, and along with a lot of people I eventually found out back where I was from, were praying that God would do something, that God would change my heart. Much like he had prayed, people had prayed for Janice, and people were praying for me. And there came a point where, of course, I realized I had to do something, and I began to follow Jesus, and everything changed. Everything changed in my whole life. But even then, I didn't realize how much prayer was a part of it. Just a very few years ago now, I was speaking in Mississippi, which I haven't done very much of. I've always been outside of Mississippi since that time, but I was back in Mississippi speaking at this event that I'd been invited to speak at, and after I got done speaking, an older man came up to me, and since I'm in my 50s and was at this time, I mean, he was old, like 70, 80 years old. He came up to me and he said, he was so happy and so enthusiastic, and he said, when they announced that your name was Ed Martin and that you were from Oklahoma, I couldn't believe it. And I said, oh, really? He said, yes, your mom asked me to pray for you. She said, my son's in a situation where he just needs to change and God needs to do something in his life. And would you pray for him that God would change his life and that God would use his life? And so she asked me to pray for that, and I put you on my prayer list, and I never heard what happened. So I've been praying for you the whole time. He said, I was so excited when I heard you speak because I've been praying that God would use you, and he has. And I said, so this is all your fault. Prayer inevitably is the first step in blessing the people around us. So would you be willing to do that? Would you be willing at your work, in your neighborhood? Would you be willing at your school? Would you begin in your world, wherever your world is, to begin this practice of praying that God would use you to bless your world? Maybe you don't know what you can do beyond that. You don't have to know what you can do beyond that. Would you begin with that one thing? And maybe you don't know what that could look like. Well, we want to show you what that could actually look like.
Heavenly Father, my day is so packed and stressful. I'm honestly even surprised I thought to pray. But I'm asking for you to clear my mind of everything that's worrying me. Help me to see what you're doing in the lives of people around me. Help me to not be so focused on my day, my schedule, that I can't be a blessing to my coworkers.
God, I want to be a good neighbor. I want to be a blessing to those around me, but I'm not even sure I know how. Could you show me ways to love and serve my neighbors like you? Could you open opportunities for me to be a blessing in their lives?
If I'm honest, most of the time, I'm just trying to survive being in this school. I don't think anyone except for a few people even notice me, and I'm not sure how I could be a blessing. But God, I trust you. I trust that you love my friends and people I don't even know more than I do. Would you bless their lives? Would you use me to bless them too?
God, I'm tired. It's been a long day, and I don't want to do anything other than zone out on the couch. But I am so thankful for my family. I want to be the kind of husband and father that you want me to be. I'm just not sure how. God, could you do something good for my family? Could you bless them and use me to do that?
I'm in this store every week, God, but the only thing I ever focus on is checking off a list and getting out as fast as possible. Could you help today be different? Would you open my eyes today to the people around me? Help me to notice the people working in the store. I'm not even sure how, but I trust that you can open opportunities for me to bless them today.
I don't even know what I'm praying for. I just know that each of the people around me here matter to you. And if they matter to you, they should matter to me. So God, I ask that you bless each of the people around me and that you give me something, even something small, that I can do to be a blessing to them.
That's where it begins, with prayer. This thing of blessing the world doesn't begin the way we often think it does, of grabbing a bunch of flyers and going out. It begins with prayer. And we ask God how he could bless the world and he could use us. And we don't pray because we're not praying for our neighbors or the people at our school because they don't follow Jesus. We're praying because we follow Jesus and we know that he's called us to be a blessing to the people that are around us. And we're asking him, God, who do you want to bless through me? How could I love my neighbor and the neighbor that's closest to me at work? How could I do that? And the truth is, no matter what else you think you can't do, every single one of us can do this. You can begin with prayer. The second practice, it's the one that is with L, and it stands for this word, listen. Here's how that looked in Jesus' life. When Jesus was coming close to Jericho, a blind man sat begging beside the road. The man heard the crowd walking by and asked what was happening. Some people told him that Jesus from Nazareth was passing by. So the blind man shouted, Jesus, Son of David, have pity on me. The people were going along with Jesus, told the blind man to be quiet. But the man shouted louder, Son of David, have pity on me. Jesus stopped and told some people to bring the blind man over. Now, I want you to just pause for a minute, and I want you to think about something and have time to read the whole scenario to you. But the Bible tells us that Jesus and his crew, this whole crowd of people that follow him around, they're on their way to Jerusalem to the Passover feast. And you know, Jericho is one of the last stops on the way. And so there's this big crowd of people coming through town, and so much so that this blind man could hear them coming by. It's a big enough crowd that he noticed it. And this place is totally packed. And people got to be talking all around Jesus. But among all of that, Jesus hears this one guy say, hey, have mercy on me. Despite the crowd, despite all the people talking, he heard this, like a mom hearing her toddler crying in a room full of crying babies. Jesus asked, what do you want me to do? Lord, I want to see, he answered. Jesus replied, look and you'll see. Your eyes have been healed because of your faith. Now, you knew that was coming, right? But Jesus with a blind man, and blind man's going to get healed. End of story. But not so fast. what I want you to notice is the question Jesus asked the blind man. What do you want me to do? Now, that seems like an odd kind of question. I mean, guy's blind, he wants to see. See, that's because you and I assume that the most obvious need is what everybody wants. But Jesus was smart enough to ask the blind man the question. It's not like a dramatic buildup. He actually wants to listen to what the man says. Jesus, in addition, knows that the man may have other problems just in being blind. I believe that Jesus is showing that he cares for this guy by just listening to the answer. And we all know listening is super important in the relationships that we have. I mean, probably everybody in here has had somebody say to you at some point, hey, you're not listening. You're not listening to me. But listening is also super important when it comes to blessing the people in your world, not just assuming you know what they immediately need. Because, see, the truth is, we live in a world where almost nobody's listening anymore. I mean, everybody's talking, everybody's tweeting, everybody's posting, everybody's listening to something. We live in a really noisy world, and people have a lot going on, but nobody's really listening a whole lot to anybody else. Most people are most interested in what they have to say. In fact, you may have heard this before, but the opposite of listening is not talking. The opposite of listening is waiting to speak. See, for most of us, we're thinking about what we're going to say. Even when the other person's talking, what's really going on in our mind is not really hearing what they have to say. It's us queuing up what we're going to say in the minute. It's us trying to figure out how I'm going to make my point. I'm not really listening to what they say. But in dealing with people, it's kind of like in real estate. You've probably heard that in real estate there's only 3 things that matters: location, location, location. Well, when it comes to really interacting with people, the only thing that really matters is their location. And what I mean by that is where they really are, where they are emotionally, where they are spiritually, what's really going on with them. Dr. John Gottman is one of the leading experts on what makes marriages happy and what makes unhappy marriages. And one of the studies he's done is he took unhappy couples and he said unhappy couples and happy couples have something similar in common. Unhappy couples, they think they know where their spouse is. By that, he says they think they know what their spouse wants and what their spouse feels and what their spouse is afraid of. They think they know that, but the truth is they don't really know any of those things. They haven't really ever listened to their spouse. He said happy couples, on the other hand, they tend to know exactly where their partner is. They know what they feel. They know what they're excited about. They know what they fear. They know where they are at that time. And the key, he said, is not that happy couples have some kind of intuitive sense about this. He said they have practices where they figure it out. They actually listen to the other person to figure out the other person's emotional location. When it comes to blessing our neighborhoods, we cannot go in and just assume that our neighbors, that we know exactly what we need. We can't assume the people we know at work that we know exactly what they need. We have to listen to the location of the people that God has put around us. We can't just assume we know exactly what's going on in their life. What is it that makes them excited? What is it that's got them afraid? What are they troubled about? Where is the point in their life? What needs do they actually have? Not what do I think they need, but what do they actually think they need? To bless the world, we begin with the B. We begin with prayer. But then the next one is we actually listen. We listen to the people and places and where we work and where we play, and we listen for what God might be doing. We listen to what's happening in their life, and we listen for a need that maybe possibly eventually God could use us to meet. And I know for some of you, when it comes to this thing of loving your neighbors, I've had people say to me, the church is led by extroverts and it's made for extroverts, and you're always asking us to go out and meet people, and I'm just not extroverted and I can't do this. I just want to remind you, loving your neighbor is not something just for extroverts to do, and it really can happen one at a time. And you can pray for your neighbor if you're an introvert, and you can listen to your neighbor who might be just as much an introvert as you, one-on-one. One at a time. You're going to have in your neighborhood a one-on-one relationship with the people you work with, and you can know where they are. This isn't about holding some big neighborhood block party. Becky and I recently just moved to a new neighborhood. We haven't lived there a few months now. We've lived there about half a year now. And one of the things that I've been practicing this in my neighborhood. If I want to be a blessing, I want to be a good neighbor in my neighborhood, as good as I can be. And so I've been praying for my neighbors. And one of the practices that I have committed myself to is that when I come home at night, when I get out of my car, I look around, and if any of my neighbors are outside, I will not go into my house and put my garage door down until I talk to the neighbor that's outside. And what I found is I often have to drive around the block a lot until they go inside. Really, what I found is this unbelievable natural resistance I have to do what I genuinely want to do. There's like it's something that's stopping me from doing it. In fact, recently I was outside. It was about 8 o'clock. It's summer. It's only a few weeks ago. I'm outside. I'm doing a few chores before it gets too dark. And while I'm outside, I noticed that a neighbor across the street from me, that he and his wife are outside, and they're obviously unloading something from his pickup. Now, these are neighbors I have not yet met, but I've been praying for them. I've been praying for the people in that house, and I've been praying, God, would you use me to bless the people in that house? I've been praying for them, and I see that they're trying to unload something. And I stand back, and the first thought that I have to myself, even though I've been praying that I could bless them, the thought I have is, wow, I hope they don't notice me. I hope they didn't see me. And I actually try to make myself small, which isn't easy for a guy my size, and I try to turn so I can go back inside. And just before I open the door, I turn again and I watch for a little bit, and it's pretty obvious to me it's going to be pretty hard for the wife to help unload this thing off the pickup truck. And I've been praying the whole time that I'd have a way that I could bless them. And I turned again to go back inside. But before I grabbed the handle to open it, I turned back and I said out loud, hey, do you need help with that? And she quickly said, yeah, that would be great. And so I walked over and I helped them unload the thing off the truck, and I introduced myself and they introduced themselves, and we had a short, really nice conversation. And she said at the end of it, wow, I was just standing here and I was thinking, how in the world are we ever going to get this thing off the truck? And then all of a sudden, there you were. But of course, I know it wasn't just all of a sudden there I was. I'd been praying that God would use me to bless my neighbors, and I had this one little chance. And I almost missed my chance to be an answer to my own prayer. But it was something I could do. If you will begin, God will lead you to things that you can do. You can be a blessing. And yeah, it does feel somewhat weird, and yeah, sometimes it's hard to get started. But would you take the next step this week of would you begin by praying? Would you begin with prayer? Would you begin with this prayer? God, how do you want me to bless my world for you today? Would you just say that out loud with me? God, how do you want me to bless my world for you today? Then God, would you help me to listen for what you're already doing in the world? Would you help me listen to the people and listen to you and see where it is that I could be a blessing? And then listen. Listen to the people in your world. Listen to the people you go to school with. And then this week when we come together in small group, I want you to talk about what God's leading you to do. And talk about the hesitancy you have. This is not something that none of us, we can all do this. But we may need each other's encouragement to get it done. And remember, this is not just listening so that we can go off and do some great thing and everybody can talk about how much good we've done in the world. This is about blessing our world because we have been blessed. We are not doing this so that everybody can say how great we are. We have been blessed and we want to bless our world. Jesus heard one man's voice among all the noise in his world. And there may be people in your neighborhood that no one has ever prayed for or no one is actively praying for. And they need somebody to listen to them. Would you hear the voice of God calling you to bless the people in your world? Would you say, God, what do you want me to do to bless my world for you today? Let's bow together and I'll pray. Father in heaven, I thank you that you've given us everything you have. What a blessing you have been to every person here. Now, God, help us to go out and be a blessing in our world. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.